So when I read this story, I had to slap myself in the face because I couldn't believe what I was reading. So an 8-year-old girl was being babysat by a babysitter, and supposedly the cops were called, and this 8-year-old little girl had a 4.5-inch little knife in which she was, I guess, attempting to be suicidal at 8 years old. And these police officers, 3 of them, 3 adult police officers, professionally trained, are on the scene. And rather than talking to this girl, who has this knife on her, this little 4.5-inch blade, remember, take in mind here that she's 8 years old, they decide that because she was being difficult and not putting down the knife, that it would be a better idea to pull out a taser and taser her. Now, when she was taken to the hospital, the police officer's reasoning for using a taser on this 8-year-old girl is that she had a knife wound on her left leg in which she already had stabbed herself. And therefore, the police officers felt as if, because she had already stabbed herself in the leg, therefore she was a danger to herself, and she was a danger to the 3 adult police officers. But guess what? There was no stab wound on her leg. So, they were just caught in a massive lie. There was no injury done to this girl, to herself by her holding this knife, threatening herself or whatever she was doing. And these police officers still felt the need to use a taser on an 8-year-old girl. Now, for those of you who don't know, I was pursuing a degree in law enforcement. In fact, just this last year, I could have become a cop. I'm qualified for the job to become a police officer, but I turned it down for many, many different reasons. But when I went through my police training and some of the police academy stuff that I went through, you as a police officer are trained professionally on how to deal with these types of fucking situations. And for the most part, 8-year-old girls, or 8-year-olds in general, are very influential and very impressionable. You can easily talk them out of doing something. But no, rather than these officers actually attempt to do what their fucking job is supposed to do, and if someone is actually attempting to commit suicide, their job is to talk to these people out of what they're doing. Especially when they're 8 years old. I mean, 8-year-olds, for example, walk down the street, and you know why kidnapping happens so often? Because kids are vulnerable and they're easily impressionable, so you offer them candy and say, hey, want a ride? They get in the car and they're kidnapped. Kids at this age are very impressionable, and because of that, these police officers, rather than actually talk to the girl, decided to tase her. And now the parents of this daughter, and rightfully so, are wanting to sue the police officers for excessive force, and rightfully so. But what doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me is that you are an adult man. You are 5'5", you are a cop. You have been professionally trained. When going through the police academy, the full training, it costs the department roughly between $25,000 to $30,000 per police officer for professional training. And because you're being professionally trained on how to fucking handle these situations, you would think that you would actually use your professional training on the people that you're dealing with, specifically an 8-year-old little girl. Why the fuck do we even put you police officers in this professional training on how to deal with situations like this if you don't even use it in a situation where it's needed to be used? And what's even more frustrating is that the police chief of the police department, who's running the whole thing, he defended these police officers' actions by saying, and I quote, he quite possibly saved the juvenile's life that night. And then he goes on to say, and I'm looking at the article right now, we can't control if the threat is 8 or 80 years old. You can't control if the threat is 8 or 80 years old? You're a cop, for God's sake. Yes, you can. If you can't control a situation with an 8-year-old compared to a fully grown male adult, then there's a problem with there. Either you're not being trained professionally enough, or you're not getting properly trained at all, much less you must not even be going through training whatsoever. This doesn't even make sense. We can't control if the threat is 8 or 80 years. Let me just say this, if you are a police officer and you cannot disarm or talk to an 8-year-old girl, then you're not qualified to be a police officer, much less a fucking father for that matter. I mean, take in mind, ladies and gentlemen, my fellow reptiles, that this is 3 adult cops not being able to subdue an 8-year-old girl What? But let's just remind ourselves that most police officers are significantly weaker than an 8-year-old girl. But nowadays, if police don't execute the person, that's pretty good news to me.